Subject of business is the Shadow Secretary for Business and Industrial Strategy, Jonathan Reynolds, on this one. Jonathan, you've heard what we have had to say here in the studio. We're waiting a government announcement. What would you like to see in that announcement? What needs to be done?
Well, good morning. Yes, well, as Liam said, I cannot stress enough just how desperate businesses are for some clarity, for some certainty, not just heavy users of industry, but your local pub, your local shop. They need to know what their costs will be, and they can't frankly tolerate or get through the cost. Many of them have been estimated. So I expect a freeze. I want a freeze of some sort. I need the detail into how long it's going to last for. What will happen, for instance, to people who hedge their energy purchases and have longer term plans in place or have lost those? I think crucially, two questions we'll have to have more detail on is, first of all, who is going to pay for this? Now, we would raise part of the revenue through a windfall tax. We think that's legitimate so that the full cost doesn't land on the taxpayer or on borrowing costs in the short term. And second of all, how are the government going to provide a long-term route away from our exposure to fossil fuel prices, away from our exposure, particularly to the cost of natural gas, both for heating but also for the cost of electricity generation? Hopefully we'll get that as well, but I'm a little bit worried, to be frank, in terms of the wider announcements the government have leaked out in the last few days. I do want to see this freeze on energy prices, but it has to be accompanied by a better long-term strategy than we've heard so far.
Yeah, well, you know you're not going to get the windfall tax. They're quite adamant on that, wishful thinking. But what I would say is this, what you're calling for, what's going to be delivered, whatever it's going to be from the government, it's too late now. I think the damage is done. We don't have to wait for the Office of National Statistics to report on this or whatever. A blind man on a galloping horse can go down the high street and see closure after closure. Restaurants, I mean, I just couldn't believe. I was saying yesterday in Belfast at the weekend, two favourite, a Chinese restaurant and an Indian restaurant, both closed. I mean, these are the sort of things, they're like cockroaches during an atomic attack. They will always stay open. They'll always be there, except they're not going to be there. And that's just an example. Look around the high street. Look around London when the Queen's funeral was taking place. And you just saw closed for business, closed for business. Not that they were just closed for the day. They were closed full stop. My point, Jonathan, is we can all talk about this, but the government, while they had that pantomime of that leadership challenge, while there was the summer recess from the House of Commons, you lot should have been in sorting this out, I would have thought.
Well, you are absolutely right, Emma, to say that the schedule, the cost for businesses, the business cycle cannot wait for the political cycle. And I can't tell you why the Conservative Party chose to have a leadership contest that seemed to last, well, forever, basically. You know, they needed to act. Obviously, I want to see action today. I think what you've just said, though, there reflects, frankly, a wider position. One thing I very much agree with the new government on is that the economy hasn't grown as it should have over the last 12 years. But I think the things that you're suggesting have made a contribution to that bleak image you put forward. That will be the impact of business rates, which need reform. It will be the impact of skills and labour shortages, the impact of a Brexit deal, which isn't optimal for business. All of these things, that's what needs action on Friday when we get that mini budget or effectively a budget from the new Chancellor. What would worry me is everything we've heard so far, it's not on those real issues affecting businesses. It's things like lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses, which is frankly marginal for the vast majority of businesses in this country. It is ripping up people's employment rights, which we were explicitly promised wouldn't happen after the Brexit referendum. Things like cuts to corporation tax are no good if you're not making any profit to begin with. So this is what I want to see from the new agenda from the government. What we've heard so far is the absolute opposite of that. And to be frank, I think Joe Biden is right and Liz Truss is wrong when it comes to how he should approach the economy.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that specifically in that tweet that was dropped yesterday afternoon by the President of the United States ahead of this bilateral meeting between the two leaders at the United Nations today. I mean, widely being viewed as a direct dig or jibe at who would not naturally be a bedfellow for a Democratic president anyway, in the form of a Conservative leader. Downing Street playing this down very much, but you agree with what President Biden's saying?
Well, I think Biden is right in what he said. I think the Americans are too diplomatic to have purposefully designed that, but it does undermine what Liz Truss is saying. I mean, on the media round I've been on this morning, I understand Conservative ministers are now saying Liz Truss doesn't believe in trickle-down economics, but what she has said is very clear. She believes that if the well-off do better, that is to the benefit of everyone as a whole. And I'm afraid the evidence doesn't support that whatsoever. I don't think the problem with the UK in the last 12 years has been that Conservative governments have been too benign, they've been too egalitarian. I mean, we've seen huge growth of food banks, huge growth of in-work poverty. This is evident to anyone who's familiar with this country. So I think her analysis is quite simply wrong. And the kind of things that I would like to see to get economic growth going, a proper long-term partnership with business, a modern industrial strategy, reform of business rates, more investment in skills and training, transport, that's a huge issue for business. So is childcare. These are real issues. The problem with the Conservative Party is it keeps looking for a magic wand, whether that's cuts to corporation tax, which, by the way, didn't increase business investment when George Osborne tried them, or things like the super deduction, which was a very short policy from Rishi Sunak to try and increase investment in assets and machinery. They're too short-term, they're too gimmicky. And quite frankly, they're right to admit their record on the economy has been very poor for 12 years, but it doesn't feel like, to me, they're yet talking about the things that would really matter and make a difference.
Well, you are fired up on what you believe really matters and will make a difference, Jonathan Reynolds. And, before the week's out, maybe we'll get back and we'll talk to you again about what is going to be announced. But thank you very much indeed for outlining your proposals, how you would fix things. Jonathan is the Shadow Secretary for Business and Industrial Strategy. Thank you very much indeed.